Vladimir Putin. But who does not know this powerful and equally influential in politics? On December 31, 1999, Yeltsin announced his resignation unexpectedly and named Putin interim president, promising to rebuild a Russia weakened. The austere is reserved. Putin easily postponed the elections of March 2000, with approximately 53% of the votes in as president. He sought to put end to corruption and create a highly regulated market economy. But what many people unaware is that Vladimir Putin is a former intelligence officer Russian and a politician who was president of Russia from 1999 to 2008, and from 2012 to the present day. He has also been prime minister of the country. You are without curious doubt how a KGB member become one of the most powerful presidents in the world. So don't panic guys, in this new video we will tell you about the journey of this famous man who was from spy to president of the Republic. But before you start, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more of similar stories. So let's enter in the heart of the matter. Vladimir Putin has served for 15 years as an officer of the KGB Foreign Intelligence Agency, Foreign Intelligence, and EU Internal Security Soviet in 1990. He retired active service of the KGB with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Vladimir Putin is in power in Russia since 1999. During this period, he transformed the country into an authoritarian society and militarist. He succeeded in invading two of Russia's neighbors and to strengthen ties with Syria and Iran. He has the intention to oppose the order Western world, and it seems operate Putin. Vladimir Putin, 17 years of the most man powerful in the world. To understand how can one man have such an influence on this country, it is necessary back to the chaos and corruption that invaded Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. When the wall of Berlin fell, 40-year-old Putin worked as a clandestine spy in East Germany for the agency Soviet Security. The KGB, the Union Soviet, it is dissolved in 15 new countries, whose new Federation of Russia, in the eyes of Putin, Russia just lost 2 million miles squares of territory. He will qualify more late this disaster event major geopolitics of the century, deploring that tens of millions of its compatriots find themselves outside the Russian territory. The new government had to sell nearly 45,000 companies public, such as corporations, mining, energy and communication, that had been handled by the communist regime. And its chaos, the Russian economy is in freefall, and all these companies found in the hands of a few known extremely wealthy men today, under the name of oligarchs Russians. At the same time, the new state Russian is struggling to set up. The first president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, was very unpopular for having cooperated with the West and for nothing arranged. He was an alcoholic, and many thought that he was an embarrassment to stay in power. He relied on the support of his oligarchs, ceding them a large part of political power. This graph shows how inequality gets worse after the fall of the Soviet Union. That's when Vladimir Anthropolitical Putin leaves the KGB in 1991 and became deputy mother of St. Petersburg. Putin uses his position to connect a treatment special to his friends and allies in the private sector. It helps them to structure monopolies and to regulate their competitors, thus rapidly becoming the favorite of the oligarchs in a short time. He built a support network consisting of oligarchs of crime boss and security officers, for the most former KGB officers, like he was. With their help, he accesses quickly to the upper echelons of the new Russian state. In 1999, Boris Yeltsin, Putin name still relatively unknown of national politics, in the post of nationalist prime minister in Charny. Putin fears and leaves them United States dominate Russia, and that NATO, the alliance which has worked for decades to contain the influence Soviet, does not extend to the new country liberated and not twist Russia. The goal of Putin is then to build a strong Russian state that is both stable on the inner plane and able to exercise greater influence on neighbors. He quickly took his chance in the post-Soviet chaos we are witnessing to an escalation of violence in Chechnya, a region that has made unofficial secession from Russia mid-90s. The lords of the Chechen War and terrorists enter Russian territory and attack the border in 1999. A series murderous tube attacks and 300 people in Russian cities including Moscow. Putin, the new prime minister, immediately accuses the Chechen separatists to be responsible for the attacks. It appears regularly on Russian television. claiming that he will avenge Russia. The population quickly rallied to him. Putin's popularity rating drops from 2% before the attacks to 45% after the attacks on journalists, and the subsequently uncovered evidence suggests that the Russian security services could have been complicit in the attacks of Moscow, knowing perhaps that he would elicit the support of a strong man like Putin. But a state investigation quickly snuffed out any divergent theory. So Russia launches a people's and devastating war in the Grozny capital, is raised by the Russian bombings, and some estimate that nearly 80,000 people died in less than a year. Russia has succeeded in bringing Chechnya back under its control. In December 1999, Yeltsin suddenly resigns, weighing from Putin, the interim president. In May, during the bloody campaign in Chechnya, Putin wins election presidential. He begins to shape the Russian state according to its vision. Favoritism and corruption remains some of its main tools, but it quickly removes the oligarchies under his reign, which support Putin are rewarded, those who don't are eliminated. Once the richest man in the world, Russia, the critic of the Kremlin is old oil magma. Mikhail Khodorkovsky was sentenced to 14 years in prison, this on a new conviction for diversion of oil. This is in fact of a Vladimir Putin vendetta for Khodorkovsky. He get involved in the opposition. The policy having tamed the oligarchy, Putin was now free to carry his vision and outside the borders of Russia. To the time, relationship with the United States were pretty good. Putin even spent holidays in the residence. George W. Bush, summer, you look the man whose eyes I found him very frank and trustworthy. But things were about to change in August 2008. Russia invaded the Georgia, a former Republic Soviet. It's a demonstration of aggression and force on the part of separatists to Russian annex Russia quickly. Two parts of Georgia arouse condemnations in the worldwide. It is worth noting, however, that Putin was not president during the invasion. Indeed, the Russian constitution states that the president can exercise only 2 consecutive terms, but does not set any limit to the total number of mandates he can exercise. Putin therefore took over the role of prime minister when his Dmitri's handpicked successor Medvedev was president. When Obama was elected president of the United States in 2008, he tries to restore relations with Russia, and they are doing some progress, in particular to limit the nuclear arsenals of both countries. But Putin remains paranoid about intentions of the United States and remains opposed to these new relationships, particularly bothered by entries by American interventions in Middle East, particularly in Libya in 2011. He publicly criticizes Medvedev for not have vetoed this action to the UN Security Council. Putin announces his candidacy for the presidency and won the 2012 elections with an unfair, grotesque march. Says Dmitry, rage can't go on, I'm here to say no to Putin. Putin begins his 3rd term again in chaos. He doubles his style of authoritarian governance within and its militarist strategy abroad, but in both cases, it shows a great mastery of information. Since coming to power in 2000, Putin kept tight control over Russian television. For the most part, all news outlets are propaganda machines belonging to the state. Its regime decides on the subjects that are disseminated and how they are always depicting it. As the powerful Russian leader in 2012, he attacked human rights and to civil liberties, indicating clearly there was no room for dissent in his Russia. In using state television by example, he led a fierce campaign against a feminist music group and defending gay rights. Dust. The last is the most noisy of his performances, was the so-called punk prayer at the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, where the members of the group shouted things rather layman to be shouting in church. Well heard. 3 members of the punk band. Possible riots have been recognized, convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Putin has also strengthened his aggressive foreign strategy. He has used military methods traditional, as seen from the army of combat aircraft, to help the dictator Bashar al-Assad led a bloody civil war in Syria. But the Putin's regime also developed an brave cyber army, the most efficient of the world, and he used to wreak havoc in the West. Hackers stole information, confidential American hack courier tails politicians, and even cut Georgia's internet during the invasion of Russian troops. And of course, they tried to sabotage the Hillary's presidential campaign, Clinton, in 2016. Russian hackers are also launched campaigns propaganda to support candidates of the right in Europe. With this, Putin hoped defeat and deepen the divide politics in democracies, Western countries. In 2014, the vision of Putin culminated with the targeting of Ukraine, another ancient country. Soviet Ukrainian president open to the West, and Putin feared they would join NATO. Russian hackers are therefore launched a propaganda campaign against him, stoking protests in the large pro-Rus eastern part of the country. He then sent Russian troops disguised, and shortly after the violence broke out, the Russian army enters action, and in early 2014, Putin annexed Crimea. He continues to support the fighting in Ukraine, and so far 2017, more than 9,000 people died on the whole world starts to protest. But Putin does not give in. You see successful aggressive foreign policy weaken its neighbors, while rallying the risks around him. But he did all this to the detriment of his own people. His invasions have resulted in severe penalties from the West, preventing businesses Russians to trade on Western markets. The value of Russian currency fell, and the industry energy on which Russia depends. It's hard to imagine Russia can continue in its circumstances. But the election of Donald Trump brings new hope for the Putin's vision. Trump's rhetoric has notably been gentle towards Russia. He could lift the sanctions and weaken NATO, liberating potentially space for the Russia becomes a power again dominant on the whole. Since the latter became president of the republic, made several changes in its country during 2 decades of reign of Vladimir Putin, he consolidated his reign, and to project to the Russian people an image of Russia as a power world, he transformed Russia from a democratic state emerging into a state autocratic, expanded the influence of the Russia in the Middle East, has strengthened Russia's relations with China, and to show a willingness to use the strength to achieve their goals, when it annexed Crimea in 2014, and its great invasion at large scale of Ukraine in 2022. Therefore, for all that which is wondering sometimes, why is Vladimir Putin still in power? It would just take now that when Vladimir Putin was appointed president in 1999, Russian constitution limited the president to consecutive terms, is why after the end of his second mandate in 2008, he was prime minister before becoming president again in 2012. However, in January 2020, Putin has drafted a constitutional amendment that allowed him to remain president for 2 more terms. He was included in a set of amendments that have been approved by the Russian legislature and in July 2020 by Russian voters during a national referendum. Thus we arrive at the end of this video dedicated to Russian President Vladimir Putin and his rise from KGB spy to president. We also hope that you liked this video, and if it is the case, please leave a thumbs up blue below video if you subscribe, and especially to activate the bell notification to continue receive more videos on similar stories by the same opportunity. Please let us